Welcome to BitBlitz Horror. I'm your host, and tonight we're diving into the fourth floor, a chilling tale that'll make you fear the night shift. Before we begin, hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories. Now, dim the lights and prepare yourself. Let's start our descent into darkness. The fourth floor. I've worked as a night shift security guard for 6 years. It's not the kind of job you dream about as a kid, but it pays the bills and keeps me out of trouble. Most nights are uneventful, just me, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the occasional raccoon scuttling across the parking lot. I've grown used to the silence. In fact, I've come to depend on it. But there was one night, one terrible night, that shattered that silence forever. I haven't spoken about it until now because I don't think anyone would believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I'd believe me. The building I was assigned to was an old office complex on the outskirts of town. It had been mostly abandoned for years, save for a few small businesses that rented space on the lower floors. The upper levels were vacant, dark, empty husks with peeling wallpaper and cracked ceilings. My job was simple: patrol the premises, monitor the cameras, and make sure no one broke in. It was late November, and the wind outside howled like a living thing. The kind of wind that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I remember sitting in the security office that night, sipping lukewarm coffee from my thermos while flipping through a dog-eared paperback. The monitors glowed faintly in my peripheral vision, showing empty hallways and deserted parking lots. Then it happened. The screens flickered, just for a moment, and when they came back on, something was different. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Everything looked normal. The same dimly lit corridors and empty rooms I'd been staring at all night. But then I noticed it. A single light flickering at the far end of the fourth floor hallway. That floor had been dark earlier in my shift. I was certain of it. No one should have been up there. The businesses that rented space only operated during the day, and even then, they never used the upper levels. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting at the grainy footage. The flickering light cast long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally across the walls. And then, movement. At first, I thought it was just another shadow shifting as the light blinked on and off. But no, this was different. Something darted across the hallway, just at the edge of the camera's frame. Too fast to make out any details, but unmistakably there. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was probably nothing, a bird or a bat that had gotten inside somehow. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Grabbing my flashlight and radio, I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine as I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the fourth floor. The ride up felt interminable. The elevator groaned and rattled like it might give out at any moment. When the doors finally slid open with a ding, I was greeted by silence and darkness. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by that same flickering bulb at its far end. The air felt colder here, heavy with a faint metallic smell that made me wrinkle my nose. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily in the empty space. No response. I started walking down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by threadbare carpet. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating peeling wallpaper and cracked ceiling tiles. As I approached the flickering light, I noticed something odd. All of the doors lining the corridor were slightly ajar. That wasn't right. I distinctly remembered checking this floor earlier in my shift. All doors had been closed and locked. My pulse quickened as I reached for my radio. "Base to dispatch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm on the fourth floor. Looks like some of these offices have been tampered with. Might be a break-in." Static crackled in response. "Base to dispatch," I repeated more urgently. "Nothing." Great. The radio had been acting up lately too. Another thing management refused to fix. I decided to check each office one by one, just to be thorough. Most were empty rooms filled with dust and forgotten furniture, desks with missing drawers, chairs with torn upholstery, filing cabinets rusted shut. But when I reached the last door on the left, the one nearest to that flickering light, I froze. The room beyond wasn't empty. It looked like someone had been living there, or trying to. A filthy sleeping bag lay crumpled in one corner alongside an assortment of trash, empty food wrappers, soda cans, and what appeared to be pages torn from old books or magazines. But what caught my attention most was what covered every inch of wall space. Drawings, hundreds of them. They were crude sketches done in black ink or charcoal, some smeared as if by frantic hands, but they all depicted variations of the same thing. A tall figure with impossibly long limbs and no discernible face standing in darkened hallways or looming over buildings that looked eerily similar to this one. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped closer to examine them. The figure seemed almost alive in its grotesque simplicity, its blank face somehow more menacing than any expression could have been. And then I heard it, a faint shuffling sound coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, flashlight sweeping across the room. But there was nothing there except shadows dancing along with that cursed flickering light outside in the hallway. "Is someone here?" My voice came out louder than intended, and more desperate. For a moment, everything went still again except for the distant hum of wind outside the building. But before relief could settle over me, I heard it again, louder this time. A shuffling, dragging sound coming from the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned back toward the door. The flickering light in the hallway cast wild, dancing shadows across the floor. And then I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, was standing at the far end of the hallway. Its limbs were too long, its proportions all wrong, just like in the drawings. It stood motionless, its featureless face turned in my direction. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stare, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Then it took a step forward. Its movement was unnatural, jerky and fluid at the same time, like a stop-motion animation come to life. As it moved, I could hear that shuffling sound again, accompanied by a soft scraping noise, as if its feet were dragging across the floor. Fight or flight kicked in, and I chose flight. I bolted from the room, running down the hallway as fast as I could. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear it behind me, that shuffling, scraping sound getting closer. I reached the elevator and frantically jabbed at the call button. The doors seemed to take an eternity to open. Just as I heard the ding of the elevator's arrival, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. I dove into the elevator, slamming my hand against the ground floor button. As the doors began to close, I finally looked up. The creature was there, its elongated arm reaching out toward me. In the harsh fluorescent light of the elevator, I could see it clearly for the first time. Its skin was a sickly, pale gray, stretched tight over its skeletal frame. And its face, oh God, its face. Where there should have been features, there was only smooth, blank skin. The doors closed just as its fingers were about to reach me. I collapsed against the back wall of the elevator, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. The ride down felt like it took hours, each floor passing with agonizing slowness. When the doors finally opened on the ground floor, I ran. I ran out of the building, across the parking lot, and didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. When I finally returned to work, I requested a transfer to a different building. I told my supervisor I'd had a health scare and needed a change of environment. For weeks afterward, I jumped at every shadow, every unexpected sound. I couldn't sleep without leaving all the lights on in my apartment. The image of that creature, its impossible proportions, its blank face, was burned into my mind. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was stress, lack of sleep, or some kind of hallucination brought on by mold in that old building. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. A month after the incident, I received a call from my old supervisor. There had been a break-in at the office complex. The police had found someone living in one of the abandoned offices on the 4th floor, a homeless man with severe mental health issues. They'd taken him into custody, but not before he'd vandalized several of the rooms with bizarre drawings. My blood ran cold as I listened. I wanted to tell them about what I'd seen, about the creature. But I knew they wouldn't believe me. Who would? So I said nothing. I tried to move on with my life, to forget about that night. But I couldn't. The memory lingered, always there in the back of my mind. It's been years now, and I still work as a night security guard, though at a different location. Most nights are quiet, uneventful. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I think I hear a faint shuffling sound. And in those moments, I can't help but wonder, what if it found me again? What if it's still out there, lurking in the shadows of empty buildings and abandoned hallways? What if, one night, I turn a corner and see that tall, impossible figure standing there, waiting for me? I tried to shake off these thoughts, to tell myself it was all in my head. But then I remembered those drawings, hundreds of them, all showing the same creature. And I wonder, how many others have seen it? How many others have encountered this thing and been too afraid to speak up? I've started doing research in my spare time, looking into urban legends and unexplained phenomena. I've found stories, whispered accounts on obscure forums and in the corners of conspiracy theory websites, of similar encounters. People describing tall, faceless figures in abandoned places. Always at night, always alone. Some call it the slender man, others the tall man or the thin man. But the descriptions are always the same, impossibly tall and thin, with long limbs and a blank face. Just like what I saw. I've thought about reaching out to some of these people, about sharing my own story. But something always holds me back. Fear, maybe. Or the lingering hope that if I don't acknowledge it, it might not be real. But I know better. I know what I saw that night on the 4th floor. And I know that somewhere out there, in the dark and empty places of the world, it's still waiting. Watching. Biding its time. So I keep working the night shift, keep staring at security monitors and patrolling empty hallways. But now, I always keep one eye on the shadows. Because I know that sometimes, the monsters we fear as children don't go away when we grow up. Sometimes they're real. And sometimes they find us. As I sit here now, writing this account, I can't help but glance over my shoulder. The room feels colder somehow. The shadows in the corners seem deeper, more alive. And for a moment, just the briefest instant, I think I see something move in my peripheral vision. Something tall and thin, with arms that are just a little too long. But when I turn to look, there's nothing there. Just the empty room and the sound of the wind outside. At least, that's what I tell myself. Because the alternative, that it's found me again, that it's here right now, is too terrifying to contemplate. So I'll finish writing this, post it online, and hope that someone out there believes me. And maybe, just maybe, my story will help someone else. Someone who finds themselves alone in an empty building late at night, facing something that shouldn't exist. To them, I say this: run. Run, and don't look back. Because once you've seen it, once it knows you've seen it, it never really goes away. It's always there, waiting in the shadows, watching, listening, and one day, when you least expect it, you might turn around and find it standing right behind you, its blank face inches from your own. And then, well, I don't know what happens then. I hope I never have to find out, but I fear that someday I will.